Dearly beloved, we have gathered here today to get through this thing called Mix CD. My name is Mike, part of the SPDM crew, and I love making Mix CDs. Each week, we give our guests a theme and an 80-minute time limit for which songs they're going to pick for their Mix CD. This week on Mix CD, we are talking about opera, and there's reasoning behind this because I am challenging myself to try and listen to more music that I have not been as familiar with in the past. And I I'm aware of certain operas because some of them are famous. I'm aware of certain opera singers that maybe not so much, maybe a little bit more mainstream, but I wanted to challenge myself to try to listen to a little bit more music that I am just not as familiar with. And I brought someone on the show who for all the years that we've known each other, I know how much she loves opera. So I have with me on the show Iris Wilson-Farley. Iris, thanks for coming on. How are you doing today?
Of course. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Mike. Yeah, good day. It's a good day and a good day to talk about opera.
So before we get started a little bit, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into opera in the first place?
Yeah. I started listening to opera. Gosh, I think I saw my first opera when I was 32.
Okay.
So it's not a thing that was with me throughout my life, other than, like a lot of people, Bugs Bunny cartoons and things like that, old classic cartoons. And I actually will come back to that idea as we talk about some of the particular pieces that I want to talk about, because the fact that opera and opera like music existed in pop culture in some really interesting ways. Old cartoons are one. I think a lot of movie soundtrack composition owes a debt to opera music, especially some of the compositions that came around in the, say, 1860s to early 1900s, really drawing on a lot of those forms. So there are ways in which I was primed to hear opera and kind of pick it up and enjoy it. But yeah, in 2002, I went to an opera for the first time, and I didn't get it. I was like, okay, it's pretty, I guess. I felt like I was trying too hard, and I felt like I remember walking out saying, I think I appreciate it, but I don't get it. And what changed it for me was God, I'm really going to age myself here. If you've ever heard of the Great Courses, which is a service that has college level courses online now, and you can have them on video or just audio. Well, way back when, the Great Courses were CDs.
Oh,
Yep,
is
yep.
isn't
And
that isn't that so sad that like CD did I ever tell you one time that Gwen our internet went out and Gwen we got a bunch of DVDs and the first thing Gwen did when she opened up the CD or the DVD was she put it to her ear and was like I don't know what to do with this. What am I supposed to do? And I have never felt worse about my age than that moment. So,
don't hand her a cassette.
yeah.
And so, anyways, I had a long commute at the time, and I got a couple of courses, and one of the courses was how to listen to and understand opera by a guy, I forget his first name. He's Professor Greenwood from the San Francisco Conservatory, and he was great. It was 32 one-hour lectures,
Okay.
and I made my way through those. And he talked about the history of opera. He talked about the forms of opera. He talked about each 8 course segment. He would pick an opera and just dissect the hell out of it.
Oh, okay.
And so there are some operas that I know, and I forget sometimes that I know them as well as I do, but they stuck with me because of this guy's lectures. And eventually, as time went on, I listened to more of his Great Courses series because he did one that was all about Mozart and one that was all about Verdi and that sort of thing. So that became a way in for me. And once I had a little bit to work with, I came back to opera in the theater, and then I got it. I was able to look at it, historically, being able to appreciate the fact that, this was cinema before cinema,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
with massive casts and big sets and special effects and things that they were doing to wow an audience and entertain them. And you had these traveling companies of players and opera singers that were going around, and these were the tentpole blockbusters of their time. And when you start to think about it that way, and you think about, some of them as crowd pleasers and some of them as big epic spectacles and that kind of thing, you can almost start to attach genres that are very familiar to us when we talk about film to operas. So I dug into that. I started bringing my son. There was about a 7-year stretch where he and I had season tickets at Chicago's Lyric Opera. And that was really cool because as my tastes started to define themselves in terms of what within the opera repertoire I liked and really gravitated to, his did too. And ours started to diverge. He started to take a liking to modern opera, which it's kind of a funny term because modern opera is like 1950
Oh,
to now.
God.
A lot of opera is old.
Yeah, yeah. Now that you say that, yeah, that makes sense that modern opera would be slightly on the older side. Okay, I get.
20th century. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Anything basically after Puccini's death, you're probably talking about modern opera.
got it.
Anything before that is what in opera terms they refer to as the repertoire. And the repertoire is to opera what the canon is to literature. And it has a lot of the same problems. It's a small collection of very, very talented white dudes who composed some great music. A lot of times tried to be they tried to reflect other cultures and got them insanely wrong. There are traditions within opera that are problematic and are being challenged in modern times. And I'm talking modern times, not 1950.
Got
Um,
it.
but I think it's going to be interesting to see what becomes of opera, because as much as I love it, I think that, and as many things as some opera companies are trying to do to reintroduce the art form to modern audiences, there are others that want to cling to the tradition, and there's a lot of great music in the tradition, and the music we're going to talk about today is music from the repertoire.
Okay.
But I think it's easier to get into that and then move into the modern stuff because
Uh,
the modern stuff gets a little experimental sometimes.
yeah, as as you progress further. I mean,
Mhm.
I feel like that happened in film. Feel like that happened in Broadway as well.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
only natural that that experimentation probably happened in opera first.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But you can tell I've gotten into it. I've become a big fan, a nut about it. I'll offer up a few thoughts towards the end about where to explore if you want to dig deeper, if your listeners want to dig deeper into opera. But one of the ones I'll share with you now is the Metropolitan Opera in New York. They, God, how long ago? 10, 15 years ago, they started broadcasting operas on Saturdays into movie theaters.
Those Fathom events. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly. A lot of times you go to the movie and you see the commercial for it. What's great about it is the experience of going to the opera. I'm gonna commit opera blasphemy here for a minute,
ooh,
because most opera people will say, "Oh, there's nothing like going to the theater and being in the crowd and being there for a live performance," and there's some truth to that. But I'm going to compare it to a football game, an NFL football game.
okay.
I've only been to one ever in a stadium. I love watching football. I love when fall rolls around, but I've been to a stadium once, and yes, there's something to being part of the crowd and being swept up in that energy. And the seats that I can afford mean that everybody's really tiny on the field.
Right.
And most of the time, I'm watching the Jumbotron, which is showing me essentially the broadcast I could be watching in a much more comfortable seat, in a much warmer environment in my home, with snacks that didn't cost me an arm and a leg, right?
Yep.
Opera can be a little like that, right? If I can only afford the upper balcony, the people are going to be a little small, but I'm going to be there. I'm going to hear the music live. That said, going to a movie theater and watching a Met Opera broadcast, you always see the biggest stars. And let's face it, we'll come back to this, the prettiest stars, the best costumes, the best direction, with a bucket of popcorn on your lap. It is fantastic. It's a fantastic way to watch an opera, and it is significantly less costly than forking out a bunch of cash to go see one. So if you're interested in just dipping your toe in, you can do it at a local movie theater. And if you find you love it, the theater's always there. So,
Right.
yeah,
That's a good call out about those events at the movie theater, because I'm sure also, look, the sound is never going to completely replicate seeing it live, but seeing it at least in a movie theater with the booming sound there, I'm sure that it's still an amazing experience.
it is. It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can vouch for that. Having spent a lot of time in both those environments, it's pretty darn good. Yeah.
So you've been to your fair share of operas, I'm sure. Do you have favorites, or do you have a certain style of opera that you like a little bit better? And also, to piggyback off of that, one more, never mind. And those first two questions, you've seen a lot. What have been some of your favorites, and what have been some of the styles of opera that you typically gravitate to more?
So I'm a Verdi fan. So Giuseppe Verdi was writing operas in the 1800s. Let's just call it the 1800s because I won't get the years exactly right. But Giuseppe Verdi, very prolific opera composer, very successful. A lot of times you hear about these artists who, produced, but they weren't appreciated in their time. Giuseppe Verdi was a celebrity in his time. They say that at one point write, you could write to Giuseppe Verdi, and you could address the envelope Giuseppe Verdi, Italy, and it would make its way to him because,
Oh,
because that's all you needed.
very
Uh,
nice.
but Verdi's music, he really brought things out of an era called bel canto, which is just pretty songs. And bel canto opera is wonderful if you want like a greatest hits because every song is pretty and melodic, some more than others. And we'll talk about one in particular that is fantastic. But I would argue that that one we're going to talk about, which is called Lucia di Lammermoor, prefigures some of the realismo that Verdi picked up. What Verdi started to do was he started to say, you know what, if someone is going crazy, let's not make her voice sound pretty. Let's not give her a beautiful melody. Let's give her something that sounds like she is going off the rails. And that and the drama around that, he believed in the drama of it. And the music fits the drama as opposed to the drama having to try to shoehorn itself into a bunch of pretty songs that everyone's going to like.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, big Verdi fan. The other thing I'll say about so my favorite opera of all time, and we'll talk about La Traviata in a little bit, is La Traviata. And I had I had a chance to meet the director of operations for lyric opera several years ago, and we were talking about all kinds of stuff. I was in an MBA program, and I wanted to talk to somebody who was an operations manager in a field other than manufacturing.
Ah, okay.
So she was telling me about the ins and outs, and one of the things she said was that there are three operas that they know that they can put on their calendar, and every performance will sell out. And some performances will do better than sell out
Oh,
because people will give their tickets back and then they can resell them. So they'll literally get over 100%
wow.
capacity on Carmen, La Boheme,
Yep.
and La Traviata.
Ah,
Now, I am not a big La Boheme fan. I think after the first act, it falls apart and gets really boring.
huh.
And I
Right.
am not a Carmen fan.
Really?
Kind of the same reason.
Okay.
It is only recently that I was able to stay awake through all of Carmen. So I'm not a big fan. Love the opening aria that Carmen sings. Everyone knows it.
Yeah.
It's one of those songs. It's like "Kill the Wabbit," kill the. It's not that one, but it's really, if someone played it, you'd know it. It's not going to be on the playlist that is in the show notes, but maybe Mike will stick it there.
I gotcha. It's all good.
Anyways, but La Traviata, oh my God, it's so beautiful. It is a crowd pleaser. It is a straight down the middle romantic tragedy, and it is over the top hearts and romance, and I love it. I loved it the first time I heard it. There are lines in it that will reliably make me cry every time I see it, and we'll talk about one of the arias from it when we get into the playlist.
Is there a particular place that you've seen or like a venue that you're either dying to go see an opera there or one that you've been to that you're like, this I'm in paradise right now. This is my
Mm.
favorite place that I've seen an opera.
I love that question. I think I'm going to answer with two places.
That's fine.
One is I've been very fortunate in getting able to see probably about 6 or 7 operas at the Metropolitan Opera in New York, and the Metropolitan Opera House in Lincoln Center is, it just makes me happy to walk into that place. They've got their Sputnik chandeliers, and it's iconic. It's the best that America has in terms of opera companies, and there aren't that many opera companies that rival it around the world. You're basically looking at, the opera in Milan, La Scala. You're looking at, the Royal Opera in London. You're looking at the Opera Bastille in Paris. It's not a big list of opera companies that I feel can stand up to what the Met has to offer in any given season. And walking into that place just makes me happy. I also got to see an opera a couple of years ago in Munich,
Okay.
and I went because I wanted to see a particular singer who is at this point in time considered by many to be the best in the world in the role of Violetta in La Traviata. So I literally flew over to Munich just to see an opera. Found a few other things to do, but I was there for the
It
opera.
was the
And
primary, but you gotcha.
yeah, and I was surprised because as nice as the outside of the building was, when we got into the opera hall, it was very small.
Okay.
And so you were right up close, and it felt, you could feel its age in that. It wasn't one of these new buildings with, 6 tiers of seating and everything else. This was just a very simple auditorium, but the acoustics were amazing, and you could see the nuance in the actors' faces. And when you've
Hmm,
got an actor, or in this case, an actress who's known for the nuance that she brings to a role, it was really something to be able to see her do her thing up close like that.
nice.
If there's one I want to go to, it would be the Opera Bastille, and that is purely because the notion of seeing an opera in Paris just plays with all my romantic notions of both opera and Paris. So,
Right.
yeah.
Very, very nice. Let's get to your playlist now. So you have arranged this playlist going from kind of like you organized it in a way where it's like a progression of a day. So you go from dawn and then you go to just after midnight. So, question for you,
Yeah.
what made you have that be kind of the theme of this particular playlist?
I was searching for a theme. I was searching for an organization for this. And I thought, I could do what Dr. Greenwood, who I talked about earlier, had done and take you chronologically through. I could focus on particular composers and take them in order, or organize it around languages. And I was just looking for something that shook up the list a little bit. And honestly, these 11 songs kind of arranged themselves into aspects of a day. In some cases, it's because in the dramatic work, that's the time of day that the song takes place. In a few of the instances, it's because to me they just sound like that time of day. And the first one we'll talk about is very much like that. There's nothing about that song that is necessarily about the dawn. But man, if it doesn't sound like the dawn breaking to me.
Ah, gotcha. So you have 11 songs on this list. You've already mentioned a couple, or like one song that you're like, I wish I could have found a way to fit this in, but couldn't. But I give you the opportunity now. Are there any other songs that you want to shout out or call out that you're like, I couldn't find a way to fit this in, and it kind of broke my heart a little bit, but I wanted to stay true to the list because you're right. Arranging this in a way, because first of all, arranging this with an 80-minute cap on this is always tricky because you gotta find stuff to cut. That's
Sure.
the thing that's I find enjoyable about this podcast until I have to do a list of my own and be like, this fucking sucks. But then it gives you a little bit more scope and a little bit more of a reason to be selective and
Yeah.
just try your best to figure out how is this all going to flow together. So, do you have anything else that you would like to shout out?
I think if there were anything else I would have liked to have added, it would have been something from that modern era that I alluded to earlier. Because, like I said, I really stuck within the walls of the repertoire. There is some amazing work being done right now, being produced by a composer named Terrence Blanchard,
Okay.
uh, an African American composer. He did a one called Fire Shut Up in My Bones, that was about his own story of coming out to himself and coming out to his community. There's another one he did recently that's about a boxer called Champion. I'm more familiar with Fire Shut Up in My Bones. It's really cool because he's using not just traditional operatic techniques, but bringing some jazz in,
Ooh.
bringing some other musical forms, and that's what I think we're starting to see more of. You're starting to see more opera coming out of Central and South America, and there's some really cool stuff, really cool Spanish language opera that's coming through, and sometimes that'll weave in music like mariachi music and other folk music. It's People are playing with it, and I think that's necessary to bring it fully into this age. I like you'll hear it as I talk about it. I love classic opera, but I think it's really interesting what some composers are doing right now. And if you enjoy what we're talking about, I would urge you to check some of those out. Dead Man Walking, there was an operatic interpretation of Dead Man Walking where Sister Helen Prejean, the woman on whom that movie is based, was an advisor to it.
Oh,
And when I
okay.
saw that it performed in Chicago, she was there and came out on
Oh,
stage at the end, very, very involved in the production of that. So you're just starting to see, I think, actually, let me say this. I think what we're starting to see is the same kind of innovation and the same kind of collaboration that people probably experienced in the 1800s during what could probably be considered the heyday of opera when opera was, like I said, opera were the tentpole features, and opera stars and composers were the celebrities. And it's interesting to see opera folk, if you will, composers and artists and everyone else starting to connect with other art forms and really bringing those to the forefront and acknowledging that if this is going to have an ongoing life, it's going to have to evolve, and that evolution is fascinating.
well, opera by its very nature and its origins also feels like a very global form of music as well. And I think that's one of the things that I think. sometimes maybe gets lost in the shuffle is that there's other parts of the world that would put their own spin on it. So
Yeah.
you see that a lot with, not just music, but you see that a lot with theater. You see that a lot with film as well.
Mhm.
So it's comforting to know that there is a place for that in opera, and places that maybe traditionally haven't produced opera, they're now starting to put their own spin on it. So that's cool for me to hear as somebody who is going to start dipping his toes into opera a little bit more and trying to find my entry point, because I never want to say that I don't I'm never gonna gi I'm never not going to give something a chance. I just need to find the right entry point.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that's let's get to the list. So your first song, and I'm just gonna have you like let's go one by one and kind of just
Yeah.
explain what was it about this song that you picked. And you've already alluded to the first song. I'm gonna need some help pronouncing because I don't read good. So this first song.
So the first piece is Das Rheingold, and it's the first thing you hear in Richard Wagner's Ring Cycle. Now, the Ring Cycle is a beast. It is it's the Iron Man of operas, because when it's produced as a full Ring Cycle, it is 4 operas over the course of a week.
Ooh,
You would go to the opera house on Monday night, Tuesday night, Thursday night, and Saturday night. It's 18 hours of opera all told.
wow.
And it is telling the story. LOTR fans, hang with me here. It's telling the story of a magic ring of gold that will control the will of all human life. And the way that it is formed, the fights that go on over it, the way, in this case, that the Norse gods, become involved. You've got a Norse god who is told he must relinquish the ring. He says no. And ultimately, it is left to a human being, a woman, to be the one who destroys the ring in the fire, and that ends the age of gods and summons the age of men. So, and yes, J.R.R. Tolkien was very, very aware of Wagner, very aware, and spent a lot of time studying the Valkyrie, which is the second opera. That is where Kill the Wabbit comes from, and Ride of the Valkyries. If you're a Apocalypse Now fan, iconic.
Or if you're just any any music or
Yes,
any
yes,
it's in an episode of The Simpsons, it's just that is in the pop culture zeitgeist as just something that
yes.
as soon as you hear it, you know.
And I will tell you, though, that dramatically seeing it in its original context, it is a revelation.
Yeah.
You know it's coming, and when it comes along, it's brilliant. So, anyways, Wagner. Wagner is super problematic, by all accounts, a reprehensible human being, deeply anti Semitic, historically speaking, probably was half Jewish himself.
Oh,
And apparently, when he found out, he doubled down on his anti Semitism.
oh,
All
oh,
that said, and this is one of the problems. There are, with certain opera composers, you face that challenge of, can you separate the art from the artist?
yeah.
I'm going to offer up to you that with Wagner, I do. That may or may not make me a horrible person, but I
No.
do. I do. Wagner's a genius, and you can't get around it. However awful he may have been to the people around him while he was living, I would say that Wagner's gift, and I'm not the first person to say this, I can't take credit for that, but Wagner's gift is pacing. I have gone to see 5.5 hour Wagner operas that flew by faster than 2.5 hour operas by somebody else.
Oh,
He just has a gift for it. And a lot of the repetition that people complain about in other operas, Wagner doesn't repeat. You got to stay up with it, because he is giving you dialogue and he is giving you exposition. There's a lot of exposition, but he's giving you all of that in the same kind of pace that you would get from a film.
okay.
And so in that way, I really think if there's any opera composer that you can look at and say, yeah, early film learned a lot from this guy. Early
Oh,
film learned a lot from him.
got it.
Das Rheingold is the first of the four Ring operas. And it's 3.5 hours long. It's one act. You need to hunker down because you're going to be there for a while.
Oh,
Um, and the opening to it is simply called the Prelude. And to me, it sounds like dawn. It is overlapping. It begins with just overlapping strings, and it sounds like water. It
oh,
sounds
okay.
like very gentle waves in water coming up against the shore, and it begins to swell. And but when you first are listening to it, the very first notes are almost imperceptible,
Hmm.
and so you really get this sense of it's coming out of complete stillness, complete quiet, and it starts to build and it starts to lead to a thing. The water thing makes sense because what we first see after the prelude are three nymphs in the water who are protecting the gold that will ultimately be used to make the Ring of Power.
Oh,
But before you get to the gold, you are in the Rhine River. And that's how we begin that opera. And that's how I've chosen to start this trip through a day of opera.
huh. Well, I'm now intrigued. You had me at Lord of the Rings, and yeah, that sounds pretty much not like completely verbatim, but like yeah, that's pretty close to the plot of that.
If you dig into the Valkyrie as Tolkien did, think of Eowyn.
Yeah.
Shield Maiden of Rohan was very much crafted after Brunhilde the Valkyrie.
Ah, got it. Okay.
I'm trusting there's nerd overlap.
Oh, of
Uh,
course. Of
okay,
course.
excellent,
Of
excellent,
course.
good.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. Number two on your list. So this we're getting into the morning. It
Yeah.
is I'm assuming when you say it's French, like it's sung in French or is it okay, so
So you were talking about the global nature of opera, and this is really, to me, one of the things that it's interesting and important to me, but I will acknowledge that I don't fully, there's research I have to do to understand this better.
okay.
But I do know this: Italy is where opera began. And a lot of the sound of opera that comes out in what we know. If you heard Italian opera, you would recognize it right away. And the Italian language tends to have a lot of vowel sounds. It has more vowel sounds than its cousins in the Romance languages. So if you look at Italian, you look at Spanish, you look at French, there are some important differences between them in terms of how they make use of vowels and consonants. And if you even look at Italian words on a page, there's just a ton of vowels. Vowels are great when you're singing because a single vowel can be spread over a lot of notes, and you have that tradition in Italian opera. French is a little more clipped, you've got more consonants, and so sometimes the phrasing and the speed and the pace of the music, it's just different, and it can hit your ear differently. And there are people who will prefer the sound of one over the other, or they'll like them differently.
Yeah,
We will touch later on a Russian piece,
okay.
and there you're talking about a real linguistic change.
Oh,
And when you
okay.
look at Czechoslovakian opera, that does affect the music
Mhm.
because the music has to sync up with the words, and when the language is being spoken in a different kind of pacing, a different kind of, like I say, the clipped endings of sentences and words, it's going to affect the music.
Ah,
And so, Lakshmi, the flower duet, I will be honest with you, I've never seen Lakshmi. I would love to. I've never seen it staged. But the flower duet is one of those that a lot of people know, whether they know that they know it or not.
mm,
For a while, British Airways was running an ad campaign, and it's like da 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 da. Da, 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 da.
huh.
And it's two beautiful female voices weaving in and out of each other, and it's just lovely. The particular recording that I put on my playlist is it features Nadine Sierra, and we'll hear from Nadine Sierra again. She's a favorite of mine,
Okay.
and Pretty Yende, who is a black opera singer, and that's a really cool thing. We're starting to see more Black opera singers. We're starting to see more opera singers coming from a lot of different diverse backgrounds. That has not always been the case. Pretty Yende is amazing. Angel Blue is another that's amazing, and there are a lot of tenors again coming from different backgrounds who are doing incredible work right now. And so I'd urge people who are interested to search some of them out. But in this particular case, you've got Nadine Sierra and Pretty Yende doing the flower duet. It feels like morning. It feels like the flowers waking up. It feels like, I'm thinking of hibiscus flowers, that curl up at night and then in the daylight they open up. The flower duet seems to have all of that going on.
So you haven't seen this one. Is this one that just is it on like on a list of like shows that you're really looking to see, or just one that you're like you need to be in a certain place to like experience it the way that you want to?
It really comes down to a matter of how often is it staged. So Renee Fleming, very well known opera singer, she is now all but retired from singing, but she's an artistic director for a lot of different opera companies. Several years back, when I was just starting to get into opera, she pushed to have an opera produced, and it was produced in the U.S. and in other countries as well. And I don't even want to try to pronounce it. It's spelled Thais. I don't know if it's Thais or, anyways. It was just a favorite of hers. It was one that
Oh.
and it became a signature work for her. And she had enough clout that she was able to go get it produced. For whatever reason, either it's bad timing on my part, or it truly is for some reason Lakshmi doesn't get produced that much. It could also be, honestly, that Lakshmi is one of those operas that has one great song, and it's the flower duet, and it works better in recitals than it does as a fully staged opera. But I'd love to see it one time to learn more. So
And just another one. Just it like, is there a particular show that you're like, I I wish that I could just like drop everything that I'm doing and just see this, regardless of the cost or regardless of if there's an actual production on it. Like, do you have a bucket list of operas that you're like, I really want to see this sometime?
I would say I was lucky because I saw a full ring cycle relatively early in my opera watching career. For a lot of people, that's a bucket list item
Yeah.
because that's really rare. That's super expensive for an opera company to do. God, are there any that I'd really just kind of die to see? There is one, and it's an American opera. Shoot, let's keep talking. I will find this.
Okay.
But it is one that I've heard Rhiannon Giddens talk about. If you're familiar with Rhiannon Giddens as an Americana performer and a banjo virtuoso, Rhiannon Giddens is also a trained operatic singer,
Huh.
and she has sung in productions of Porgy and Bess and other operas as well. Her last studio album included an aria from a an American opera. It's a modern opera, and I believe it's set in Appalachia.
Oh.
Uh, that one would be really great to hear. So I'll look for the name of that one. It will include it in the show notes.
Okay. Cool. So number three, you've got something from a rendition of Romeo and Juliet,
A
I'm
rendition.
assuming. And you've got it's called the Poison Aria, which I'm very curious how this kind of feels like morning to you, because I look at
Yeah.
a word like poison and I'm like, huh, that's that feels more like the opposite end of the spectrum, but I'd like to hear what is it about this, again, just like zero context with this, but I'd love to hear. You put this number three, still in the morning.
Okay. So this is the second of three arias that are on this list that are sung by Nadine Sierra. She is okay. Here's the thing,
Here's the
like
thing.
like any good lesbian,
Okay.
you put a pretty woman singing in front of me, and I'm pretty darn happy. Nadine Sierra is gorgeous. She is a Cuban American soprano. She is very, very social media savvy.
Ooh.
So if you look her up on Instagram, you'll see things like she likes to shoot rehearsal videos in bathrooms and stairwells, and it's just swoon worthy. But she's doing, in this case, the one of the big arias from Romeo and Juliet. Now there are two big Romeo and Juliet operas in the repertoire. One's Italian,
Well, yeah.
and it's like Montague e Capuletti is what it's called. So it's the Montagues and the Capulets, and you know where it's going. But it was the kind of adaptation where somebody took the broad outline of Shakespeare's play and really didn't pick up a lot of the language or a lot of the dialogue. So it's the story, and you would recognize it, but it's not like this one. This one is Charles Gounod, a French composer, and man, whoever did the libretto really leaned into Shakespeare.
Okay.
And so you get the balcony scene, and you get the big lines that you expect to hear from Romeo and Juliet. And you get the scene where Romeo and Juliet are parting in the morning after they've been secretly married, but he has to leave because he's killed Tybalt. Everything you expect from Romeo and Juliet, if it were just done as a play, is on stage in this opera.
Okay.
And that's one of the things that's really nice as an entry point. You were talking about entry points earlier, Mike. That is, I think, for a lot of people, a nice entry point. Also, Verdi's Macbeth. You get these operas where people stayed true to Shakespeare. And if you dig Shakespeare or you know Shakespeare, it can be an entry point to see now the operatic version of what it is that you already love. In this case, the Poison aria, first off, it takes place in the morning, which is why I put it there.
Okay.
It also happens right after Romeo leaves the bedroom.
Oh, okay.
And Juliet's parents come in and they tell her that she's going to marry Paris. And she pitches a fit a little bit and then realizes that she is really stuck because she can't tell anyone that she's married to Romeo. And she's got this. And Friar Lawrence comes in and suggests, hey, you know what? I've got this. I've got this.
I've got a
I've got a
solution.
drug. I've
It's
got a drug. It'll take care of you. It'll make you seem like you're dead. So she's got this, and it's called the Poison aria. Interestingly, it wasn't sung for a long time. It was considered, in addition to all the other singing that Juliet has to do, to be too taxing
okay.
on the soprano to do all of it. And so Poison aria is relatively new, but generally now, if you see it, you get the Poison aria. What a lot of people will talk about with the Poison aria is this is the scene where Juliet grows up. When you first see Juliet on stage, her first aria is bouncy and bubbly, and she's having her coming out party, and it's all this one. She is trying to figure out, she's dealing with the possibility that this drug might not work and it might actually kill her. She's dealing with what's Romeo going to do. The possibility that he will find her and think she's actually dead is occurring to her. Very psychological,
Yeah.
and it's very much where her commitment at the end of the aria to drink the poison, and she'll do that. She'll drink the drug on stage at the closing notes of the aria, and this seals her fate. And it's crazy. A really good singer doing this aria, all of a sudden you just hear it. You hear something different from this character, and you realize that, between what the composer's doing and what the singer's doing, there's this magic moment where right in front of you, you're seeing this character come into her own and make a decision that is going to change everything.
So, two questions I'm thinking about right now. You've mentioned the word aria a couple of times.
Yes. Okay.
For somebody like me who is not as familiar with opera, what exactly is an aria?
An aria is, generally speaking, an aria is a song. In stage terms, in play terms, it's like a soliloquy.
That's what I was thinking when you mentioned for this particular performance. It felt a little bit like a soliloquy, but I still wanted to ask. Okay.
Arias usually happen. Well, I shouldn't say usually. Yeah. Most times, most times an aria happens when that character is alone on stage. They're alone with their thoughts. It doesn't necessarily move the plot along, but it moves the character along. The other version of an aria that you get a lot of times is the opening aria, which, if you're a Disney nerd at all and you follow the fact that with Little Mermaid they introduced the I Wish song. That's from Howard Ashman and his work on Broadway. He said you got to have an I Wish song. You got to know what it is that the heroine wants. Entrance arias are kind of like that. You get the mindset of the character, so you know where they're beginning, and then you can watch where they go from there.
Okay. We talked a little bit about entry points, which I appreciate. This, I would love to see an operatic version of Macbeth. That would be very fascinating. I'm asking you, Iris Wilson-Farley, to put your thinking cap on, and I want you to think, for as long as I've known you and all the pop culture stuff and movies and plays and everything, if there is anything that you would love to see turned into an opera, like movie-wise or anything like that, what would it be?
That is a great question, because you're starting to see a little more of that. I think it would be fascinating to see how you would adapt the Skywalker saga into an opera, but only the good stuff, right? Like, screw the Ewoks.
How dare you?
No. Let's not even go there. But you keep the stuff, right? You keep the Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, the father and son stuff,
the core stuff.
the
That
core.
Yeah.
That stuff is the stuff of opera. These are big melodramatic bits, and I think there's an opera to be written there someday, and I think it could be really interesting because the earliest operas came out of Greek mythology,
Right.
and then they came out of Shakespeare, which you could argue, people have called the secular scripture. I think it in as much as Star Wars is a mythology for our age, it's begging for an operatic rendition at some point.
I mean, we've done literally everything else for Star Wars. It's time to get Star Wars on stage, right? And I fully support your Ewok slander. It's perfectly fine, and you're also correct. The Ewoks are essential to the rebellion, but they're also kind of useless as well.
And we don't want the Nub Nub song
No, absolutely not.
in an opera. It's just going to throw the whole vibe off.
Well, yeah, it does throw off the movie, unfortunately, because it's like, what are we doing here? But so Disney, get with Iris, make this happen. She's got something percolating in her head. That'd be good. All right, so number 4 on your list, you've got something from La Traviata.
Yes.
Here, something that kind of signifies afternoon. And I'm kind of curious because you've got 3 songs that signify the afternoon. And I'm wondering if the order of these 3 kind of mattered, or if these were all just kind of lumped in together. It's like, these are the afternoon songs.
I would say they're lumped in together.
Okay.
They're the afternoon songs.
Okay.
If anything, they do a sort of a build like a bell curve.
Okay.
So we're going to start quiet and then have something that's got a little punch to it, and then something that's just super, super pretty. The first of the 3 is by Giuseppe Verdi. It's La Traviata. It's called Addio del Passato. This is going to sound really morbid, but I have done the whole... One of the things you do as you get a little older is you start to think about leaving some documentation of what you might want, like, your funeral to be.
Yeah.
I want a song at my funeral.
Oh, okay.
So that's how much this particular song means to me. It comes at the beginning of the 3rd act of La Traviata. So the first act, you're introduced to Violetta. She's a courtesan in Paris. If you have seen... Oh, here's another one. Here's a good entry point. If you've seen and love Moulin Rouge, La Traviata is the basis of Moulin Rouge.
I have, and I love Moulin Rouge.
Right down. You remember when Ewan McGregor throws the money at her at the end and says,
I've paid.
Thank you for teaching me how, thank you for teaching me that love isn't real, basically. Yeah. You get that scene.
Oh.
That scene is lifted directly out of La Traviata.
Got it.
La Traviata, just a quick other pop culture note. La Traviata happens to be the opera that Richard Gere's character takes Julia Roberts' character to in Pretty
Oh
Woman,
shit.
which is super tacky. When I first saw Pretty Woman in 1991 when it came out, I thought, oh, that's so romantic. They're going to the opera and she's got a beautiful red gown and they did the thing with the jewelry and the snapping the case and yeah, okay. How tacky is it to take your sex worker girlfriend to see an opera that's about a courtesan and the courtesan dies at the end? And, they pan to her with watery eyes and of course she is. She's
This
just
could have been
watched
the
this
life.
sex worker character die on stage of tuberculosis. It's not an opera with a happy ending, but it's beautiful.
Richard
So,
Gere, how dare you? You
right?
should have.
Right?
There should have
Cold
been more.
bastard.
There should have been more situational awareness. I
Yes.
completely.
Wow.
Yeah, that I did not. I did not realize that. It's been years since I've seen Pretty Woman. So
So let's stick with Moulin Rouge.
okay.
You've got this guy who is, he is head over heels for this courtesan. She is connected in ways that he never will be. She's the toast of Paris. There's a duke, and she could run off with the duke, or she could run off with the guy who's in love with her, and she chooses temporarily to run off with the guy who's in love with her. Things go bad. He throws the money at her. It's really tasteless on his part, and he leaves ashamed of what he's done. And so as the third act opens, she is lying literally on her deathbed.
Hmm.
The doctor is saying she maybe has a few hours left. And she's reading a letter because now Alfredo, the guy who is in love with her, has learned why it is that she left, why she said, I never loved you. She lied and said that so that she could get him out of the picture because she had to. Again, Moulin Rouge. And she's reading the letter from him saying, I know the truth now. I'm coming to you. Please wait for me. Which really tuberculosis. Anyway,
Like,
so
yeah, just hold off. Can you just stay alive?
hold that thought. So she's reading it, and it's one of the few moments where there's spoken language in the opera. But again, it's melodramatic, it's super romantic. It's playing the music from when the first song he sung to her is playing underneath while she's reading the letter. So she's holding out hope that he's going to arrive and that maybe somehow they'll be together. But this song, Addio del Passato, is goodbye to the past. And it is heartbreaking. In the particular version that I put on the playlist, it's sung by Lisette Oropesa, and she is fantastic. She's the singer that I went to see in Munich. Another gorgeous soprano.
Right.
I got a thing for
You got
gorgeous.
I was about to say, it seems like you've got a thing.
Yeah, yeah, and Lisette Oropesa is just fantastic, and conveys so much. I think one of the things that I would point to in this particular one is she acts the hell out of this. There's nothing broad about the performance. It's nuanced, but you can hear the emotion coming from her in ways. There's an old way of talking about the way that people would sing in an opera. They'd call it park and bark. The singer would find their spot on the stage and they would just sing.
Mhm.
And that's what it was. And everything else was filler for them to sing their big songs.
Ah,
But what I feel like I've had the benefit of seeing more and more and more, and it seems like it's the standard now. Is that no? You're on stage. You are acting your way through this. And I'm not. That's not saying that the greats, the Maria Callas's and Luciana Pavarotti's and others, weren't acting the hell out of their roles. I'm sure they were. But what I've gotten to see are people who really come at it with a great deal of nuance and an acting skill that I don't think has always been there. I think you've had a lot of performers who were singers first with a little bit of acting, and now you've got an expectation that they're going to be really good at both.
well,
So,
it's
and Lisette Oropesa definitely fits that bill.
because it does seem like for an opera singer, you do need a mix of both. Because it's one thing to be an outstanding singer, and I think you see that in music and even Broadway to some extent or another that you can sing, but can you perform? That's those are kind of two separate things. And it's interesting that you point out how Park and Bark, that's fantastic. That's like a known concept. But to me, as somebody who doesn't know a whole lot about opera, that is the vision in my head that I always think about when it comes to opera though, is that you you have these individuals singing and then you have somebody that just on stage front and center, just them just belting it out. That's
Yeah.
that's like a common perception in my head at least, and I feel like that's probably a common perception of a lot of people's view on opera. But then if you once you talk about it more with somebody, you realize, wow, there's a lot more to this than just being an outstanding singer.
Well, and it evolves, and is it's susceptible to fads.
Oh yeah,
And I'm not suggesting with the comparison I'm about to make that triple axles are a fad, but there was a point in time when in skating, no one had ever seen someone do a triple axel before. Now it's like everyone has to do it just to show that they belong on the stage at the Olympics,
right.
right? The latest fad I've noticed, and we'll shortly here get to a singer who is the first person I saw do this. It's like everyone needs to show at some point that they can sing an aria or part of an aria or they're part of a duet laying on their back.
Huh.
So it'll be some sort of a bedroom scene or a mad scene. We'll talk about mad scenes in a little bit too, where they're on their back singing, which is
Not the
one of the
ideal.
things that I cannot overstate is the technical skill
Yeah.
of these singers at the level of who's on the playlist. They're incredible. And you look at them and you don't know where the sound is coming from. You don't they don't if you are familiar with Broadway or a Broadway fan, you've probably noticed that if you're up close enough, you'll see the microphone on the forehead. Their voices are amplified. In an opera hall, the voices are not amplified. There are not microphones and speakers. It is simply the artists on stage. So there's great power in the voice, great nuance in the voice, great duration in terms of what they can do. It's the level of control is insane.
Yeah.
Now you take that and you say, okay, now do that and do it lying down.
In a unnat or not unnatural, but just a very different position, different. Well, obviously
Yeah,
it's a different position, but it's it requires a whole other set of complications. Uh,
yeah.
because
And in the relatively short space of time, 22 years that I've watched opera, I've seen that fad become cemented. Like all of the singers that I enjoy watching the most, they all do it. It's almost like it's become a new compulsory
it's a flex in a way.
activity. Yeah, it's a flex. It's
It's
it's a total
just
flex.
just look, I could do this and watch as I, power through this while lying down. I
And I
like
dare you to do the same.
to me, it kind of reminds me a little bit of, and just hear me out on this. It kind of reminds me a little bit of what has become of the NBA slam dunk competition because, you know, back back in the day, it was pretty simple dunks, you know, jumping from the free throw line, like a windmill, different things like that. But
Yeah,
now it's like it's not enough to do a windmill. You have to do a windmill while doing 360 jumping from the free throw line as
yeah.
well. So it's like, oh, okay. Well, just adding another complication in there to prove that yeah, I can do this. I belong here.
It's the X Games of music. Yeah, pretty much.
Very, very nice. Okay, so your 5 and 6 are from the
Yes,
same opera, and
yes.
they're both afternoon. So walk me through 5 and 6.
Okay, so the Marriage of Figaro takes place over a day, and so this one was kind of a layup when it comes to putting it in its place within a day. These happen in the afternoon, and they center around a single character. Now, another one of those songs that everyone is familiar with from pop culture and from cartoons is the Figaro. Da, da, da.
See,
Da-da-da, da-da-da,
what
da-da-da-da.
is
Yeah.
it? It's Miss
Da-da-da.
Mrs. Doubtfire. The beginning of
Oh,
Mrs.
Mrs.
Doubtfire.
Doubtfire. Okay, I was going Tom and Jerry. Okay, but it's out there. It's out there in a lot of places. This is not that opera. So there's Il Barbiere di Siviglia, Barber of Seville. That's where that aria comes from. And it is a comedy, but then after, and that was done by Rossini. But then Mozart got the libretto for The Marriage of Figaro. So this is a sequel.
Oh,
This is a sequel to Barber of Seville.
oh,
We're taking the character of Figaro and also the character of Susanna from Barber of Seville and bringing them in, and now they are engaged and about to be married. And this is all the hijinks that take place around them getting married, the fact that the Count would like to sleep with Susanna. Figaro gets ticked off about this. The Countess, who, in Barber of Seville, Figaro was helping the Count win the Countess's love. And now the Count is running off after other people. So you've got a heartbroken Countess. There's a beautiful aria where she sings about the love that she misses. And it all evolves over the course of a day. There's this character named Carabino. And Carabino is like a 15, 16-year-old boy who has a crush on everything that moves. And he's got a particular crush on the Countess.
okay.
But he flirts with Susanna as well. Now, the Count is aware that Carabino has a thing for the Countess, and he's also aware that the Countess is feeling a little neglected, and in an effort to get rid of Carabino and just he's a nuisance. So let's not court fate here. He decides to send Carabino off to join the military.
Oh.
And so the first of these two songs is called Non più andrai. There's a funny story around this one. This song leaked. So way back when, there were leaks of songs. People were anxiously waiting to see what Mozart was going to come up with. And this particular song made its way out and was a hit before the opera came out.
That's hilarious that there was a leak for something like this, but it just goes to show just the popularity and
Yeah.
the desire to hear something before it comes out, because it's not like you're going to have like a pre-performance of the song. Like, no, you're going to come to the opera and you're going to have to listen to this, and
Yeah.
if you want to hear it again, you can't get the cassette. You're just going to have to come back and just listen to it again.
Yeah. But Non più andrai is Figaro singing to Carabino, explaining just what his life is going to be like now. And it's very bouncy and it's a great song. It's just a great song. I put it on here because it's one of those melodies that will stick in your head, and it's fun. And you probably gathered, I like a lot of big, sweeping, tragic songs. This
No.
is one that is
Yeah.
not tragic.
Yeah.
This is just fun, and opera can be that too.
Well, and
Uh,
and a good one to put for an afternoon song,
yes,
as you know, because when I think afternoon, it's one of two things. One, afternoon is when you're still awake enough, like morning's over, post lunch, you're just bouncing around and you're just like powering through the rest of your day until you can finally be done. Or you just take a nap all afternoon. And but
yeah,
for afternoon, the way that you described this piece for number five, that to me, yeah, it does represent what I would envision a song would be depicting the afternoon.
yeah. Needless to say, shipping Carabino off to join the army doesn't take, and he makes his way back.
Shocking.
And there's this whole great scene. It's fantastic. It's comedically fantastic. The music of it is amazing. And I should pause and say a real quick thing about Mozart here. I am not the world's biggest Mozart devotee. I get that. I kind of think of Mozart as you don't get Verdi unless you had Mozart first.
Mm,
Mozart was absolutely groundbreaking. There's some stuff by Mozart that I love, and some stuff where I'm like, okay,
I don't get it.
I can appreciate it, but I can't get it. But this opera is fantastic. And Carabino comes back, and he is in, if I recall correctly, he's in the bedroom with the Countess and with Susanna. I've seen productions of this that get really, really suggestive. Like they're just doing everything they can to mess with him and get him all worked up and hot and bothered. There are others where he's simply reading this love poem that he's written as a pledge of how he feels about the Countess. It's called Voix che sapete. I wish I could play a little snippet of it for you, because it's got this opening lilting little bit. It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a summer day where you just want to kind of settle in and maybe take a nap, and it's lulling you to sleep. It's so pretty, and I think it's one of my favorite Mozart songs. It's just melodically, it's gorgeous, and there's it's not simple. It's layered, and it's really, really nice. It's just nice. It's you know these two songs from Marriage of Figaro. They're just like that light spring or summer afternoon.
Well, we got number 7, which
Yeah.
is this is your dusk, so like an evening song. It's your song from Russia as well.
Yes.
You specifically pointed out that so the letter scene is what it's called. What's the name of the the opera? Eugene.
Eugene Onegin.
It's not how I would have pronounced it at all, so thanks for the assist. But you said, a clip, you know, I think particularly starting at the 8 minute and 50 mark.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, quick story. When I was dating my wife, I sent her a YouTube clip of this particular singer, Anna Netrebko, singing the letter scene, and I said, "I think this is just gorgeous. It's Tchaikovsky." So Tchaikovsky wrote Eugene Onegin. He wrote a couple other operas as well. One of the things I love about it is that the same things that make Tchaikovsky's ballets really amazing is all the movement that you can hear in the music, and that driving force of music that rises and falls. There's a lot of that going on in the letter scene. The letter scene is 13 minutes long.
Okay.
Most of the songs that are in this playlist are 2 minutes, 3 minutes. They're not really that big, but the letter scene goes on a bit, and it is full of longing. It's the real main character of it is not Eugene Onegin. It's the young woman who, in the first act, is pining for Eugene Onegin.
Oh,
And in a bold move that would have been socially unacceptable, writes him a letter professing her love. And this whole scene takes place as she is writing the letter and trying to figure out, should I send it? Should I not send it? There's a lot of indecision that takes place in operas. It stretches out the song.
well, you gotta.
You gotta have the verse where I'm going to do it, and then the verse where, oh shit, what if I do it? And then there's the verse that I am going to do it, and then they do it, and it usually triggers some tragic string of events. But the letter scene is beautiful. It is in Russian, so it's got a different sound to it. That and the fact that it's Tchaikovsky's music, it is distinctly Russian to me. And the first time I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, this is whatever I thought Russian music was. This is it. But it has a beauty to it. And I tucked it in here at dusk because we are out of the frothy afternoon for sure, and things are about to get weird. And before madness comes desire. And so this song is all about desire, all about impetuousness, and all about rash acts.
Ah,
And we're going to see the consequences of rash acts in the next two songs that I'm going to talk about. But I don't want to short the letter scene. It's gorgeous. There is one thing that I'll touch on quickly about this particular performer. Her name is Anna Netrebko. She will show up again
okay.
on the list. She is one of the first singers that I really gravitated towards. But Mike, you mentioned earlier that it's a global art, and we're recording this after a particularly tense day in terms of Russia
Global.
and Ukraine and whatnot. But she is a Russian soprano, and she was actually sort of blacklisted around the world in the major opera houses because she jumped to Russia's defense and said they were provoked early on when the current conflict in the Ukraine came about. These kinds of things, there are geopolitical actions that have ramifications in a global art form. And so it's a little interesting to have her in here. I know there are a lot of people who would never think to put Anna Netrebko on a list like this right now. She's starting to play more halls. I think people are starting to see that, the pendulum's starting to swing the other way and separate the art from the artist, all that sort of thing. But it's worth noting because, sometimes you can think you're going to see an artist, and for reasons that have to do with, being able to enter through customs and things like that, they just, you're not going to get to see them because, again, the artists are international, the songs are international, the works and composers are from all over the world. It's one of the joys of it, but it also has its complications.
Huh. That's interesting, and how I imagine that for as long as opera has been around, there is, because you mentioned the word celebrity a lot, and how
Yeah. Mhm.
there is always so much scrutiny with everything a celebrity does, about how they're not able to, like, privacy is out the door, but
Yeah.
also your views are scrutinized a lot more. If you have a particular view of something, then you're going to need to justify it, and that will have consequences. Whereas a lot of other people, they don't have to bear those
Yeah.
consequences in a same way. But as a celebrity, or in this case, an opera singer, that's it stinks, but at the same time, like you said, people have short attention spans, and
Yeah.
the it's interesting that you mentioned this is the second time you mentioned separate the art from the person. And I think for a lot of people, there are certain things, if you did something, it's like, I can look the other way on some of that, or just, I'll take this for what it's worth. And I think for some things, it's like, yeah, I can't do it for that. And
Yeah.
I I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just interesting just hearing what some people, like, there's certain artists that I can't listen to anymore because, like, they did something that I'm like, I just can't. But then there's other artists that I'm a little bit more laxed on, and it just boils down to preference and grace, I guess, to some extent or another.
Yeah.
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 So, all right. Moving on to number 8, where, as you mentioned, things are going to start to get weird. Admittedly, this is the only song on the list that I actually know, because I used to be in choir and such, and you hear, like, no, God, no, we would never sing anything.
Okay. I just
We would never sing anything like that. But choir and music class, we would listen to stuff, and the Magic Flute was one that I feel, at minimum, you at least know the story of the Magic Flute, but to listen to some recordings of the opera, yeah, I think there's some familiarity there. But I actually do know this song, or this aria, as you put it. So explain. We've got the Magic Flute, Queen of the Night's aria, right at the beginning of your night sequence.
yes. Yeah, there are four, the last four songs fit into the night. Now this one is there at the front because it comes up suddenly. And I wanted night to ramp up and then calm down.
Well, yeah, because
So,
that feels like a natural place to go, because there's, depending on how you spend your night, yeah, there is that. So,
so we are in the realm of madness, and night's come in and it's hitting hard. So two quick fun stories about flute, or about this particular song. First off, Mozart was a pain in the ass. If you've seen Amadeus, you've got a sense of it.
yeah.
Mozart was, he could be political, he could be subversive, but one of the things that he wanted to do very badly was to write an opera in German. Most of his output all of his output except for the Magic Flute was in Italian. This is the only one that he did in his own language, and he he spilled all of the Freemasons' secrets. He built them all into this opera, and so it's dressed up in this fantastical quest story, but the quest follows the initiation rites of the Freemasons.
Oh,
I love the fact that he did that. I mean, what a freaking pain in the
yeah.
ass. Anyways, the other is that this particular song is one of two songs that got put onto a record made of gold that is playing in the Voyager spacecraft, I think still as we speak, heading out into outer space looking for other life forms. And it's got all kinds of stuff on it having to do with human life. Two pieces of music are on there. One is Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones. The other is the Queen of the Nights aria.
Huh.
And the NASA scientist, I heard an interview with him. He suggested and lobbied for the Queen of the Nights aria because he felt like it was appropriate heading out into the black stillness of space
Huh.
to have the Queen of the Night doing these things. And this is an aria that is technically insane. There are high notes being hit here and sustained here that are sadistic on Mozart's part to have written this. And it's always amazing to hear it sung. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. It's show stopping every time. I heard that Professor Greenwood I was talking about once saying that, you know, if you really want to have fun with it, watch what the other soprano on the stage is doing while she's forced to watch this other soprano get the big moment, because this is no doubt the big moment in Magic Flute that people are waiting for, and it's fantastic. It's a beautiful piece of music.
So we got number 9. So it's the mad scene from
Oh,
Lucia
Lucia,
Lucia.
Lucia di Lammermoor. So this is a tale about Scotland written in Italian.
Awesome.
And what you need to know, all you really need to know, is that Lucia is in love with a man named Edgardo. And Edgardo, their love is secret. Edgardo is the sworn enemy of Lucia's brother. The Lammermoor family has fallen on tough financial times. And so Lucia's brother wants to marry her off to some other dude, doesn't know that she secretly got married to Edgardo. There's a lot of secret weddings going on in opera.
Oh,
But the upshot is that Lucia kind of was walking around seeing ghosts before, being forced to marry this other guy, and then Edgardo showing up at the wedding ceremony and rejecting her. It makes her snap.
well,
Now,
that's
it's a lot, right?
fair. Yeah.
So here's the thing. There's a history in operas, especially during the bel canto era, of mad scenes.
Okay.
It became a very trendy thing. Because one of the things you could do with a mad scene is allow a woman to show a range of emotions that she would not normally be allowed to show in public, in real life, or on the stage. But if she's going crazy, all bets are off the table. And dramatically and musically, it opens up the playbook. So, of all of the mad scenes, I think most people, well, I'm sure there are people out there who would argue for other mad scenes. But the first mad scene I ever saw was in Lucia di Lammermoor. And to me, it is still absolutely the best and the most chilling, in part because of how it's set up. All of the town is celebrating the wedding that has just happened. Lucia and her new groom have gone up to the bedchamber. Everyone's like, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be great for us. Our financial future is secured. This is fantastic. They're literally singing a party song. And then you see Lucia appear at the top of the stairs. And depending on the way they've chosen to stage it, she might have a little bit of blood on her white dress. Or in the most recent staging I saw, she could be covered in gore.
Ooh, okay.
Because what you don't see that's happened off stage is that Lucia has killed her groom. And the version that I saw where she's kind of covered in gore, she did it with a fire extinguisher.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, people have started getting creative with this. So Lucia comes down and she begins, and she's in a fugue state. She is She's seeing people, thinking they're somebody else, all this stuff. It is absolutely magnificent. It goes on for 15 minutes. Now, the clip that's in the playlist is a part of it. I think I got the part that is it's played on a glass harmonica.
Ooh.
And here we talked, as Mike said, a couple of times about separating the art from the artist. This is an area where it's interesting to consider the artist when listening to this, because why am I drawing a blank on the guy who composed this? Shoot, the composer, Donizetti. Donizetti would he certainly would have been diagnosed with some mental disorder.
Oh, okay.
Some people have suggested it was probably that he was probably bipolar, but he was not a stranger to mental illness.
Okay.
And a lot of people have suggested that he was bringing some of his own experience into her psychotic break.
Ah, okay.
One of the tools he did to do that was he used a glass harmonica. Now, there are only like 8 people in the world that know how to play glass harmonica, and they all know each other. So it's really, it's a profound treat, I guess, if you're able to see a production where it's done on glass harmonica. If it's not done on glass harmonica, it's a flute. But there's a point where she begins to sing, and this is fantastic. I just structurally, this is so fantastic. You'll hear the glass harmonica play a little snippet of a melody. It's like, and then she'll sing those notes. And then it'll do a little bit more, and she'll sing those notes, but then they start to diverge. And it's supposed to be like
How poignant from
glass harmonica is her mind,
and
and she is departing from
right.
her own mind. I've never heard applause like that.
Oh,
Like when a singer ends this and sticks the landing, the applause will be thunderous, and it will go on, because we've compared opera in a few places to sports. This is sticking the landing. This is a signature statement. And what else do? You feel sorry for the
person.
guy who has to start singing next, because she has just owned the room in a way that I don't know. The times I've seen it, it's just spellbinding.
Yeah.
It's yeah. So Lucia di Lammermoor, the Mad Scene. This one is actually the third one I mentioned. There were 3 sung by Nadine Sierra. I've seen her do this. If you really want to check it out, I believe it was in 2022. She did a production, or she starred as Lucia in a production at the Met Opera. She's amazing. And it is the one where she killed the guy with the fire extinguisher. So if you're interested in a little Pulp Fiction, man, they really went there. And it's a cool production. I will say, if you watch it on video, do yourself a favor and skip over the interviews in between the acts, because they're a little insufferable. But if you just watch the opera itself, it's breathtaking.
Going into our penultimate, like, just nights that we're calming down, we're settling down a little bit. Your number 10, so your penultimate song, our piece rather.
Yeah.
What do we have here?
Okay. So night is calming down. It's settling down. Ironically, so this is from a French opera called The Tales of Hoffmann. This is the song that opens it's probably the 4th act. It's the 3rd major scene. It's a really interesting structure to the opera, but there are 3 stories that the main character Hoffmann is telling, and this is at the beginning of the 3rd story.
Oh.
The story takes place in a Venetian brothel, and this song is setting the scene in that brothel. But it's just, you know what it is? It's like the nighttime analog to the flower duet we talked about earlier.
Oh, okay.
It's 2 women singing. It is it's the recurring line is oh night, oh night of love. It's, for me, it's very special because it is the song that my wife and I walked into for our wedding.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, we did not have people walking either of us down the aisle. We both walked in along the sides while this music was playing, and it's beautiful. It's this is the second of the Anna Netrebko songs that are on the list. She's singing with Elena Garancha. Their voices just blend beautifully, and it's just It's a very, very pretty song. In terms of pop culture, the place that I bumped into it is the melody plays. If you've ever seen a Woody Allen movie with Owen Wilson,
Oh, Midnight in Paris.
Midnight in Paris. Thank you. So, if you've seen Midnight in Paris, it's all, he wants to go to different times, and he ends up in the Belle Epoque. So he's gotten out of the time when Hemingway and Fitzgerald and others are there, and now he's gone back even further in time, and they go to this cabaret, and the music that's playing is the melody of the Baccarol from Tales of Pop. Anyways, it pops up in some places. You might hear it and say, "Oh yeah, 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 I know this one."
Okay.
If you don't know this one, you definitely know the last one.
So the last one, we've got a song just middle of the night, everything's kind of calmed down. What is this last song?
Yeah, I put Deep into the Night because that is where it takes place.
Uh-huh.
So Turandot is the one Puccini opera I have on here. Now, quick note on Puccini. For the most part, I think Puccini has like one good song in most of his operas. People love Puccini. I'm not as big a fan. Nessun Dorma, though, is one of the great songs. And the version I have on the playlist is Nessun Dorma sung by Luciano Pavarotti. It was his signature song when the Olympics were in Toronto
Oh,
in the early 2000s. It was a super big deal that he came out of retirement to sing, and he closed the opening ceremonies with Nessun Dorma.
ooh, okay.
What's going on in the opera is that there's a princess, a Chinese princess, who doesn't really want to get married to anyone. She has placed a challenge before her
Sensing a
suitors.
trend, not
Yes, right.
yeah.
And there is a riddle that needs to be solved. And the hero has till dawn to solve the riddle. And so everybody is looking for the answer. And Nessun Dorma is nobody's sleeping.
Hmm.
And it's him just saying, it's full of swagger. It's him saying, "I am going to figure this out, and victory will be mine." And the last words are "Vincerà, vincerà, victory, victory." He is like I said, it's all swagger.
Hmm.
It's gorgeous. It's To me, what's really interesting about it is it's a great example of what a lot of arias do best, which is that they absolutely leave you wanting more. The Queen of the Night, it ends too soon. And if you really think about it, if it had kept going, you'd get bored with it. It's perfect, but you want more.
Yeah.
Nessun Dorma, I always wanted to have another verse because the melody is so beautiful, and when somebody sings it well, it's got such power. You can't beat Pavarotti doing Nessun Dorma, and you can't beat it as a way to end an opera list.
Right. Well, that is the list. Final question that I have for you is that if this playlist was an actual CD, what would be the album cover?
I feel like it would be a shot of the side of a 70s era panel van with a sunset airbrushed onto it. Like one of those really cheesy ones with like maybe a wolf in the corner.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. Just really throw people off. But something about the day ending or beginning.
Depends on your perspective, I suppose, or depends on
Exactly.
how, you know,
Is the sun coming up or going down? We don't know.
we,
But
we don't know. Well, Iris, is there anything else that we didn't cover from an opera perspective that you want to leave people with, or anything else that you want to say about opera?
I guess the one thing I want to say is just thank you for giving me the opportunity to blab on about it. I think listeners, if you're still listening at this point, give it a try. There's some really good stuff out there, and some modern stagings where we haven't talked about Rigoletto, which is a classic Verdi opera, but I've seen that staged in like Rat Pack era Las Vegas. There's some really cool stuff, and yeah, I'd say just take a look. And again, I can't say enough about those Met Opera broadcasts into movie theaters. They're a great entry point. Again, starting with a story great entry point. Starting with a song that you like is a good entry point. So, but yeah, give it a try. There's a gag in Spider-Man Far From Home, when he's over, they're on their class trip to Europe, and they're in Venice, and their teacher takes them to an opera, and there are like 9 people in the opera house, and 3 of them are using walkers to get
Yeah.
around, and it's the whole idea that the only people who would show up at an opera are 90 years old. It can feel that way sometimes. The crowd is an older crowd, but every now and then you see somebody who is younger and giving it a try, and it's kind of cool to see that. I don't know. It's like I said, I tried it at 32. It didn't take the first time, but 2 years later, it really took, and I love it. So again, Mike, thanks for giving me a chance to talk about it.
Of course. I'm very glad that I got to learn a little bit more about the origins of your love of opera because, again, as long as I've known you, I know that there are certain things that you loved, and I know that opera was one of them. So I appreciate you sharing that with me, and just getting a little bit more perspective on opera. So Iris, do you have anything that you want to plug or anything, or do you have any social media that you'd like to share if somebody wants to continue the conversation about opera or anything, I suppose?
Not beyond what I've already shared. I would tell you that for us trans folks, it's a weird time for social media right now. So I'm not going to share a lot
Understandable.
of social media contact info. But again, for those that have made it to this point, thank you. And again, the I'm sure the playlist will be in the show notes, and I urge you to give it a try.
All right. Well, my friends, the time has come to end this episode of Mix CD. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to anything and everything SPDM Crew wherever you get your podcast. Join us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, YouTube, and Blue Sky at SPDM Crew. Check out our website soon to be out at spdmcrew.com. You could follow our playlist on Spotify and Apple Music at Mike Hilty. Shout out to HiFlyer Creative Studios for making our awesome logo. Greatly appreciate their support. And if you have any marketing, logo, or brand standard needs, contact them at highflyercreative.com. If you've got a podcast idea or you're interested in being part of the SPDM crew as a guest or collaborating, email us at spdmcrew@gmail.com. Until next time, no matter what happens now, you shouldn't be afraid because I know today has been the most perfect day I've ever seen.